I was like, I only have 10 minutes, and they're gonna be all in the elevator. And then I forgot my coffee, and I had to go back up, and I went back through the elevator class, basically.
Well, it's 10 o'clock. I'm gonna leave the door open just while we start, just in case someone wants to filter in, because it is a 10 a.m. panel.
Yeah.
A lot of people were
It's
there
10
last
a.m.
night.
after Friday.
At a convention, people drinking. That's one of the first rules
How-
of being artist and vendor. Don't drink so much you can't make your booth at 10 a.m.
Yeah. First tip of the day. My dad always says, if you're going to be dumb, you gotta be tough. And that's applied to so much of my life.
That's good. That's some
Yeah.
solid advice.
Yeah.
That's,
He's been
or
telling me that for
I would
years.
say dumb or lucky. Or very lucky.
All right. So, welcome to How to Prepare for a Con for Artists and Vendors. I know that title is a mouthful, but that's what we're going to be doing. So, there you go. Do y'all want to introduce yourselves?
I'm Ariel Burgess. I'm one of the official little-time artists here, and I've been coming, this is my 7th JordanCon, and contract artist too. It's 10
I'm Rodgers. I pretty much exclusively do art at conventions. I've been doing this since 2012. This is only my 3rd JordanCon though. I make funny animals that say terrible things and occasionally do a little bit of fantasy illustration. But yeah, this is what I do.
I'm Charles Urbach. I've moved between selling art at conventions and freelancing in the tabletop gaming and publishing industries. I've done work for Magic the Gathering and Star Wars and all kinds of collectible card games and role-playing games. But I actually got my start as a fantasy artist selling my art through fan conventions. When I say I kind of moved between them, at different phases of my career, one would lead to a little bit more better cash flow and more business sense, and then the other one, it would kind of feed into one another. So I never saw it as really an either or. I also work in Prismacolor colored pencils, which makes it a little bit interesting on the freelance side because that's not really a medium that's considered. So another way you could put it is I follow the money. If the freelance gigs are good, maybe we dial back the cons for that year. If the conventions are doing better, maybe we dial back the freelance. But I've worked in both arenas and can talk a little bit about how working on Magic can influence what you do in terms of doing person events too.
Cool. Well, to start us off, I'd like to hear what the top 3 items in your convention survival kit are.
Someone to call when I'm panicking.
Is this like during the con or before?
That's before the con.
Okay.
And I'm not panicking because I'm in plan, because I plan at a time. I'm usually the first person to turn all my stuff in, even though I'm like, I don't know, it's you have to prepare for things to go wrong, because conventions are expensive and they're a big prep to do, and people don't realize like, oh, JordanCon, it's in April. We start prepping like right after this one for next year. To plan what we're going to bring, what we're going to do, who are going to do new pieces, when am I going to do them. January to April is my big busy time. I can't take commissions usually. And so someone to call when my computer shuts off randomly in the middle of, the 17th hour of me working right before. That happened many times this year on all of my paintings. I have a lot of recovery files right now. So that would be number 1. And a budget. That's a big, important thing. Always factor in your budget and think about that. Don't be like, oh, well, I'm just going to order a bunch of stuff and we'll calculate how much it's going to be. Think about your budget. Go to the things you're going to order from. Look at how that's going to calculate it. Look at what the expense is going to be. And then how much you're going to charge on the things you're going to sell. And if you will break even, and if there's a point to going in the first place, or if you will actually make more than you're paying for that. So that's definitely budget. I don't think there's really a third thing.
That's okay.
Bubble wrap.
Those are 2 big things.
Bubble wrap and tape.
For me, it is hand sanitizer and an emergency stash of whatever medications you might need if you get sick. That's number 1. Number 2 is paperwork. Whatever documentation you have, that you have a table there, and your hotel documentation, anything that you book or pay for ahead of time, have your paperwork with you. Do not count on them to always have your information correct. Also, that includes if you need a tax license. You will absolutely not get to set up at some conventions if you cannot show your tax license. Know the laws in your state and whether you need one or not. And let's see, the third thing, I had one and I forgot it. I guess the third thing, honestly, is a good attitude. You go into it with a really good attitude and a smile and treat everybody well. And that's like my third, like, foundational, have to have it for any convention.
Always be friendly.
Well, and those are, what's nice about this is everybody's going to cover things that are valuable, because honestly, you can't pare it down to 3 things.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's funny that I walk in with a cart. That's all stuff that I was doing homework at my booth, prepping stuff for the booth. But I'll start with that. If you're talking about doing conventions, you absolutely need a piece of equipment to haul your own stuff in. I cannot tell you how many times people get to the show and they have no way of moving what they've brought with them in. They're going to bank on like the hotel having luggage carts, or maybe people will be nice, get a good cart to transport your stuff, or whatever it is that you're doing. I always have some sort of backup display plan, because sometimes you'll get there and your booth setup won't be on paper. They said it's going to be this, and then you get there, like let's say I ordered 2 tables, which your paperwork suggestion is excellent, because sometimes you'll get there and be like, oh, we don't have you in our paperwork, or did you pay? Do we have a space for you? And much like with a contract with a publisher or something, your paperwork is your proof that you paid for a space and everything.
And don't just have it on your phone.
No.
That doesn't apply.
If your phone dies, you don't have your stuff, and have copies at home of everything.
But be able to, like if you get there and you have 2 tables and they're supposed to be 6-foot tables, and you get there and usually, if they're 8-foot tables, that's in your favor. But let's say you get 2 8-foots and you actually get there and they're 6 foot, and instead of being 3 feet wide, they're like these little
2
half
feet.
tables.
Mm-hmm. Or yeah.
And you want to have a sort of what do they call it? Like a go bag or whatever, a bug out bag. You want to have like a load-in setup where you can adapt to that situation. You don't want to build everything. So like in my case, and it's actually become the bulk of my display, I have pop-up banner stands that I can arrange in different configurations. But more importantly, if I show up and I forget something, I've always got a backup thing. I'm never there without a backdrop or without a way of displaying it. And the other thing I'd recommend is any kind of supplies, like if you're talking about the art show, and there's different concerns with the art show and the vendor hall, but if you're going to an art show, always bring a set of your own hanging supplies.
Yeah.
Like if you know they're going to be doing pegboard, make sure you've got like enough pegboard hooks that go into the board for what you're going to show. If they're doing like binder clips and S-hooks, because you'll get to some conventions, not JordanCon, because April Moore and her team are a crack special spec ops team of art show experts.
You know what you're doing.
And they really do. But basically become prepared to hang everything yourself and have that there. Don't anticipate that the event you're going to is going to know what they're doing, because most of the times they do, but when they don't, a lot of times it's spectacularly unprepared. And you don't want to have to wait 4 hours to hang your art in the art show while you're missing stuff at the con. So bring your own equipment for whatever venue you're going to.
Yeah.
Good advice.
Even if you're worried about your bag being like rated by the TSA. I brought wire cutters this year. I brought wire, and it was really important because one of my frames, the hanger broke off in the middle of hanging it. And I was like, okay, what are we gonna do? And we ended up using the hooks to hold him up, and Steve commanded, and his back thing came on. But, we tried to hammer, and we tried broke pliers, and we just, because you don't know who's gonna be available to help, and you need stuff. So, and then you could get people coming to you and ask, always make sure you get your tools back.
Yeah. There are about 500 straight pins in my display. Because I didn't have
And
any
paper clips. Yeah, I bring a whole thing of paper clips, so you do everything with paper clips. You can wind them in the back, you can wind them in, you can push in your cloth. And,
Pick a lock.
yeah.
For reasons.
So what I'm hearing from all of y'all is prepare for the worst case scenario.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
the old adage, it's better to have it and not need it than to need it and not have it. And when you talk about the attitude, that's another great example. You know, you'll get folks who show up totally unprepared, and a lot of times they're the ones with the worst attitudes. It's like, I expected this, this, and this. I was working a pretty good-sized convention, and some folks showed up at the con not having reserved space. They had to build display panels. The art show chair, he shouldn't have let them in. He should have said, I'm sorry, all the panels are sold. But he said, well, there's some wall in the back. We'll build the panels for you with the materials. And they proceeded to complain about everything the entire convention, a con that they hadn't pre-regged for and were being done a favor to being allowed in. You don't want to be those people. And it's not even so much that they paid a price for it, because it happened because they were friends. Everybody was friends. But it was, I lost all respect for those people. At that point, it's like, well, when you go to the con, those are your coworkers. It's like you're going to a job and you walk into your office and somebody's there passed out with no pants on the floor. You know, they're not going to be that, well, at most jobs, that's not going to be like, hey, this is ready for work. So you don't want to be that person that gets there and is unprepared and kind of digging their own hole, and then you take that out on other people. And likewise, if the con is unprepared, it's much easier for you to not get angry with them and take it out on them. It's just part of the job. It's being a professional about what you do, not just showing up and hoping it works out.
And a lot of times you're there to sell stuff,
Right.
but most of the time you're there to network.
Right.
Too.
And your clients will pick up on that. Like the people who walk in the convention and want to buy things, like they'll pick up on you being nasty or a jerk, or you know, you may actually be losing money by being in a bad attitude.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, you're there to make money and network.
Yeah, just think about it from a customer perspective. If you're walking past a bunch of tables and they all have relatively the same displays, right? If you see somebody who is like this, just staring out at you, just kind of got the eyes and the RBF and everything, are you going to approach their table, or are you going to approach somebody who's smiling, who's engaging with people, who is, you know, busy but happy? You're going to probably avoid the first guy. So always think about how your attitude is projecting to people. And people will remember you more for the bad things than for the good things. And how good your art is not going to matter if you're a terrible person.
That's really good advice.
Even if you're having a bad moment, a bad day, trust me, I've had days like when my copies exploded and then my pen has leaked, and then, you know, the other thing I brought is broken, and just everything's going wrong, and my pants have ripped, and you're just like, I lost my shoe. So.
It's the glamorous life of the fantasy artist.
It's pretty great. Right, but you can just try, like, life is ridiculous, life is funny, and just try to laugh it off. Or seclude yourself for a moment, breathe, let it go, get it out, and
cry in a closet.
Have an assistant, tell
Yes.
them I need to step away for a minute, I need to take a walk.
Delegation is really important if you have the ability to delegate, because you can't do everything under the sun.
Well, and selling your work at conventions it takes a kind of temperament. I mean, it's like any job. You might find that you're actually not cut out for it, or you're not good at it. If you don't like engaging with people, like, and the example, artists are a great example. And I don't ever talk in hard, fast rules, because everybody finds their own way, and it's foolish to say don't ever do this. I mean, there are things that are kind of like that, but even then there can be exceptions. But a lot of artists are not necessarily gregarious people. They're not people who want to engage. And when you talk to some, particularly artists who do a lot of contract work, who conventions aren't really, they don't think of them as a primary means of income, they almost resent their fans. I mean, there's some groups now that even teach, if somebody comes to your booth and they're at your booth for longer than 5 minutes and you know, they're not going to buy anything, stop talking to them. Like, literally, like, turn. Like, I'm going on now, Billie would be like, okay, and just kind of like, she wouldn't do that, but, and I can't, it's like, if you don't want to engage people, if you don't want that sort of hectic, I don't get to eat at, when you're at the booth, you might not eat all day.
You might not drink for a long
And
time.
you have to love what you're getting out of it, whether it's interacting with people, whether it's the big fat dollars, whatever it is, you go back to your room and you roll around on the bed with piles of cash.
Thanks to advice from Charles.
Well, hey, that's but it's okay to say, look, I don't like this, but then you find another path. Don't go and then resent it all. Don't resent the people. There's some folks I know who do what they call art show bingo. And it's a card. And it's funny because there's truth in it, but it's also incredibly disrespectful to your customers, where each square in the bingo card has a phrase that you hear over and over again. Things like, did you make this? I could do, are you the artist? I could do that. And you hear those things, and it's fine to say, oh, I get so sick of it. But the cynicism involved in actually playing a game where you mark it down, and in the middle of the show you yell bingo, and of course your customers don't know, I have to ask, why are you here? If it's so egregiously hurtful to you, if you disrespect these people so much, one gentleman told me they were paying out at the con, and I said, oh, it was a great con, I talked to all these people, and he's like, well, I don't care if they talk to me, I just want them to buy my stuff. And I was like, okay. And then they walked us into the room to get our checks, and they very unprofessionally they put both of our checks on the table at the same time so we could see it, and mine was considerably larger than his, and he kind of did like a double take, and what I wanted to say to him was, well, those extra zeros on there come from me actually respecting and liking my customers. So the attitude is a huge part of it, and if you're an artist in particular, you may have to go out of your comfort zones to get to that. You might have to get comfortable with the idea of selling without being a salesperson. Just talk to people, be kind to them, respect them and what their interests are.
Yeah, because they came all the way from wherever they were coming from, specifically to go and see all the things that are being sold, to talk to those people and to see their wares and to give you their money possibly, and to spend the time standing there and talking to you. So if you were gonna go out of your way to do that for somebody else, how would you feel if they were like, why are you in here? Buy my stuff, I don't want to talk to you. Always bring food. That was something that I was thinking about. I always bring a bunch of protein bars. I bring a lot of protein bars, stuff that isn't going to make you feel bad, stuff that if you start getting really lightheaded, you're not going to crash, and water if you're allowed it. I always bring water.
I sneak water in whether I'm allowed to or not.
You should be always.
And along with all of this, a lot of it is a developed business sense. You have to treat this as a business if you want to be successful. If you want to just do it as a hobby, that's okay too. But just understand that there is a difference. And part of the business side of things is learning how to sell and how to sell yourself, how to be confident, how to talk to people and make them feel good about themselves, make them feel good about their interests.
Really?
Yeah.
So they're not like, oh yeah, I'm just like you. And I get that a lot. Like, when did you start drawing? Oh, when I was a kid, everybody starts drawing when I was a kid. I just kept with it. It's just something you practice on.
Yeah.
Again, always back to this. Be kind to protein bars. Be prepared for everything to go wrong and be on fire.
Be sure to drink your Ovaltine.
Do you guys do anything to get into that headspace to engage with people? Do you need plenty of alone time to sort of balance it out, or any advice in that area?
If you know yourself, if you're an introvert and you need extra time, make sure that you can get that. And if you have an assistant, make sure that you're saying, I'm going to step out, so you can recharge, and that's how introverts recharge. But for me, I'm an ambivert, so I like the people stuff, and I know that at some point I'll be alone and I'll be fine.
For me, it's if you are an introvert and you do have a problem, if you have an extroverted friend who is really good at talking to people, ask them if they will help you, and then watch them interact with your customers and take notes. And you can learn almost any skill, and that especially goes for talking to people. So if you do feel awkward, And if it's your first time you're going to, you know, it's always great to have someone there with you who can take the pressure off and who can maybe talk a little bit. And also, sometimes other people sell your art better than you do. Because a problem that we artists have is that we're our own worst critics. So it's sometimes hard for us to brag on ourselves. Well, we feel like it's bragging, but it's really just selling, right? It's easier for someone who loves you and loves your work to sell your work for you sometimes. So have an assistant. If they're really good with people, take notes.
Don't talk down about yourself and your stuff. Don't like self-deprecate about it. Like, oh, it's not that great. So and so is way better.
Yeah, that's a very
Would you
hard
buy
lesson.
from somebody?
That's the opposite of selling.
Yeah.
That's not selling.
Right.
I'll pay you to come and listen to me talk about my art at my booth. I'll pay you. It's like, no, you're I had a thought and it disappeared. What was your question again?
Oh, do you do anything to prepare
Oh,
to get into that headspace?
Yes, and when you talked about like, you know, stepping away from it or needing time down. Early, when I started, I was hanging work in the art show, so it was more like a gallery experience. And you might go into the art show and you talk to people a little bit, or you go to like a reception or something. When I first did my first retail booth, it was at Origins Game Fair in Columbus, and I was blown away by how busy it was by comparison, and how active you are all day engaging with people, even if it's not directly selling. And at the end of that, I was exhausted after the first day of working the booth. And my father, who often assists me at some of the bigger conventions, and he has a background in government and catering. And he would give me all this advice from the catering arena, and it was amazingly applicable to art. A lot of the same principles that he and his business partner ran into were directly the same. The correlation was exact, except I'm not selling food. I'm not doing a service industry type job. I'm selling art. But one of the things he described it as, he goes, well, you've been on stage all day. And it's like, I thought about it, and it's like, well, yeah. And as time goes on, it really is an experience where you are, I call it being on. You get into that booth, and as soon as customers start walking by, and even sometimes the other vendors and things, you're on. You're putting on a show, whether you know it or not. And particularly when you're successful and you have fans, people are actively coming. It's like, I came from Argentina to get my Magic cards signed by you. It's what Ariel was saying. These people they're emotionally invested in that experience. You want to give them a good experience. And it's no different than when the degree of it is different, but it's no different than when you wait in line to get your favorite celebrity to sign your thing. They want that 2 minute, the 2 words you say to them, like, oh, hey, nice hat. And then they go back on Facebook and they're like, oh my God, David Tennant said I had a nice hat. And he remembered it was the hat from episode, such and such. But you are honest to God, you're on all day. And you're not putting on a performance, you're being you, but you're wearing that persona, and it is exhausting. And at the end of that, it's not so much that I want to get away from people, it's that I don't want to have to be on anymore. I don't want to have to, I want to be able to say what I'm actually thinking. I don't want to have to, to measure my words because I don't know if this person is a Trump supporter or a Trump hater. Or, do they think oil? I mean, when you talk to people, you really do have to mitigate what you say and how you say it, and you have to act like you want to be there, even if you're feeling sick, and all those things we were just talking about. And at the end of the day, for me, I want to be able to be real. And not have to, I call it putting down my sword. It's like, okay, I'm done for the day. I've been in the arena all day. I'm done fighting monsters and hydras and stuff like that. I want to go and just relax, whatever that means. And it's, what's that?
Self-care is so important.
Yes.
Speaking of, wear comfortable shoes with support. It's very important. When you do days like this, on, and you have things like last night where you're running around, and then you have, a dance tonight, you're still going to be on the next day. Your feet are going to hurt. Bring several pairs of shoes, especially ladies. Like, don't just bring things that are up high. You need support on your feet.
Yes.
And whether it's ugly or, I'm wearing my ugly sneakers right now because my feet hurt, and I know that later I'm going to have to change and do a bunch of stuff. I'm going to do a lot of walking, so I want to make sure that I can walk tomorrow So I'm wearing the ugly shoes now.
And nobody's gonna see your feet behind the table, so it's cool.
I would say wear comfortable everything. Don't ever, and I'm going to use an example, and I don't mean it to sound sexist at all, but it's something less so now because there's much more diversity in the art shows. But when I first started doing big shows like JordanCon, most of the artists there were male. And there was this perception of if I bring my wife or my girlfriend and she's, we dress her up, she will be a booth babe. And I'm so happy to say, there's another con where somebody said, did you bring booth bait to the con? I'm like, my dad. He's sexy. It's like, yeah, look, he's got that little man bod going. But the first thing I noticed was a lot of those women were, and the dudes they're not coming out in a Speedo and like a mesh shirt or something like that.
We wouldn't want most of them.
They would bring their significant other and dress her up to attract people to their booths, and it was very evident those women were uncomfortable. It's like, and that's the thing, the booth it's not like going out on a date and you're feeling good and you're having a good time, you're working. And there's nothing less appealing than somebody who's dressed up to look at a persona, but they don't want to be that way. Whether it's you as the artist, like you come in a suit or something, and if you're not comfortable in it, people aren't going to respond to that, let alone bring someone else and dress them up in what amounts to a costume. So be comfortable in who you are. That's the most attractive. That sells your work the best because you can be natural, you can be yourself. And that's usually more engaging than trying to specifically play a role.
Yeah, I have to say when I first started out, I was given the total opposite advice, and it was by a big headhunter, the agency, and he said, well, you're pretty, and if you do art and you want people to buy your art, you gotta look good, you gotta dress up. My wife does this, she's a comic book artist, you gotta show cleavage, you gotta dress like your characters and play it up. But at the same time, if you do that, I've had people be like, oh, you couldn't have drawn that because you're a woman, and you're dressed that way. So you're just trying to get me to buy stuff because you have boobs. And
That was the worst advice. My
that was the
God.
worst advice, and I immediately was like, no, that's not who I am.
Have y'all ever been given bad advice?
Oh,
Or things that were like shown to be untrue about preparing for a con?
Yeah, most of it, I would say when you get advice from somebody, sort of measure what their success is. If they are constantly on Facebook complaining about how crappy a con was, not the best person to take advice from, And some cons are bad. There's some of them that are just going to be bad. But if it's somebody that's consistently negative and not consistent with their display, not consistent with their sales and everything, maybe don't take advice from those people because they're not going to be giving you anything that's valuable.
I would even extend that out further. Temper any advice or teachings that you get with your reality. Don't, if someone says, do it this way, because I'll tell you flat out, there's no formulas to this. There's no magic bullet. There's no, if you do this, I can guarantee your sales will go, people will sell that to you. In fact, right now, there's a lot of groups and classes and artists, and I don't like to use the word helping because when you charge someone for a class to learn about something, you're not helping them, you're teaching them. They're hiring you for professional development. But a lot of the things they say, it's almost like if you follow our methods, you'll make, and then they trot out some artists, I made $9,000 at JordanCon, and I made $40,000 last year because I took such and such a class. And there's nothing wrong with taking those classes and things, but you have always got to be tempering the things that people tell you with your personal experience and your personal reality. So if someone says dress a certain way and you do that and you're really uncomfortable and you don't like it and everything, it's okay to say, yeah, that was bad advice. It's okay to listen to someone, look at what they do, measure their success, which is very important, but evaluate it. You're constantly evaluating, you're constantly measuring it to see what actually works for you. And if something isn't working, stop doing it. Don't keep doing it because, well, I talked to so-and-so and he's done such and such and he said do it this way, but it doesn't work. It's like, well, stop it. Do something different. And don't follow the herd. Don't follow the trends.
It can be kind of cliquey in that way where you feel like, well, I didn't take this, I didn't go to this retreat or pay for this thing, and that's why I'm not making as much. Or these people aren't hanging out with me because I'm not part of this group, and I'm not going to make as much money because I didn't get their advice, and that's not true. I mean,
It's bunk.
It
You're
kind of
right
goes back
now.
to know yourself too. Like,
Yeah.
if you can know yourself, you're just gonna do better in life and, I imagine, in cons.
I would say, to build on what he said, there are a lot of artists out there who do this for a living, and they're looking for assistance sometimes, and local to whatever conventions. If you're interested in this, volunteer to help somebody. Sometimes you'll get paid if they're really good to you. Sometimes you'll get paid a percentage or paid a flat rate or something like that. Sometimes they'll just cover. They should at least cover your badge and meals. To me, personally, I would do that. But if you can sort of help someone out who's already doing this and been doing that for a while, you learn a lot of tricks of the trade, and you learn what you might like to do, and you learn what not to do sometimes. Because either way, it's a learning experience that you didn't invest $1,000 or $2,000 or more dollars in. So.
And there are artists now who are doing that, and they're actually, I think they're kind of taking advantage of that. They present it as that. They're getting free labor in exchange for, I'm successful and awesome and you can come and work for me. And I only mention that because it could still be useful for you to do that, but know what you're getting into.
Yeah.
Don't think that because so-and-so has a successful IP that they've launched and like, you can go and you can be my gopher for the weekend. It's like, well, yeah, that's valuable. I mean, if you can get into a giant show, like C2E2, which I know you were at, but you had your own booth. This lady was not gophering. But you go to some of these big shows that would be really hard to get into at the very beginning of your journey. But don't for a minute think that artist who's like, yeah, I'm looking for someone to be a booth assistant for this thing. Don't for a minute think that, don't buy into their mythology. Do it because you want to take out. And that's which is kind of a general principle I follow. Any decisions you make, even those first decisions, you are always doing it to see what you can get out of it. And I don't mean in that sort of selfish way, but in a practical sense of, if I go for this artist, regardless of whether they're a nice person, regardless of how successful they think they are versus how they are, what do I get out of that relationship? And that's also advice I give to people when they're doing early contracts and the pay is really bad and it's like, well, you have the ability to turn any opportunity to your advantage. A lot of it is on your attitude when you go into it and what you're going to be paying attention to. So don't let any of those things take advantage of you. You squeeze as much opportunity and experience out of them as you can.
Milk it.
Yep.
As much as you can, milk the experience. And if anyone ever wants you to pay them for the opportunity, run away.
Nope.
Fast.
I want to add two things. I'll have to leave a little bit early. I have a signing I have to go to. And being respectful, I want to let you guys know that. But also, is there anybody here who wants to do galleries? Open galleries? Okay, some quick advice that I want to impart, and it's something that I had to, learn in trial and error. Have a cloth to go, bring your own cloth to go on a backing. It should be stretchy, so that way if you pull through it, they're not immediately going to show. So, bring your own tools, bring your clips, bring paper clips, bring wires, bring all that stuff. Because I see a lot of beautiful art, and then there's a cork board behind it.
Yeah.
And the black background just kind of makes your art stand out. If you can frame, but understand framing is expensive. It's hard. It's a pain in the butt. I have bled and cried on most of my frames every year. And you have to remember when you're doing your budget that it's expensive and factor that in, not just be like, oh, I'll do framing, and factor the time in that it takes to frame. Also, if you're going to do canvas, don't use glass. It will shine. I unfortunately had to this year. Try to mount your stuff if you're using a roll, because of the overhead lights and you're using glass, it'll reflect off and people can't see the art as well. But also, it makes it very heavy, and it makes it also dangerous. If it falls down, there's a break, and if you're traveling like you're flying, that can also break. And I did actually fly with glass this year, but what I did was I took blue painter's tape and taped all along in case it shattered, and that way it didn't destroy the framework and a lot of glass everywhere, so you've got protection. But the black cloth is super important, and I keep going after Amanda about it, and I'm like, just go to Joann's Fabrics, get some stretchy cloth. It's like, find out what your bay or your booth or your wall is going to be in dimensions, and try to do that. Try to get something around that, that length, but have extra so you can, depending on where you're going, you'll have the right cloth for it. You're not buying it every time. And keep a chart of all these things that you buy. Those are business expenses. Like throughout your year.
Don't
right. Don't just wait to the end of the year or the end of the quarter to do all your stuff. As you buy things, fill it in. Like take your receipt, fill it in, do QuickBooks or whatever you're gonna do, and then you have all your stuff listed, and it's not so overwhelming when it actually has to be calculated. You have to give the IRS money.
I have a question I'm really specifically interested in hearing your answer to, and it's about inventory, like deciding how much to bring and what to bring. I feel like you are really good at deciding and preparing and pacing yourself, and that's what it looks like from the outside. It may not feel that way, but I just am curious about how you guys decide that.
Yeah. So I there's two different perspectives. I think what Charles does is amazing, and I eventually want to have the space for your inventory. I do not. So that is part of my issue. Is I'm looking into moving and getting a bigger office where I can have space for those things. But because I don't have space for those things, every year I have to plan, know what I'm bringing, and get it printed and get it made. It would be cheaper to have, like you have, a lot of prints and things in a storage box, or where you can pack and you have your inventory and you can bring it with you, instead of having to get it printed every time, because that will be expensive and you will have to make that money back plus.
But I also produce all my own prints, so.
Right, and if you have the space, get the right printer to produce your own prints. Again, I don't have that space right now. So I have to factor in, and I have to order from California, which is my printer. So, and they take 3 days to turn around. It's 9 days. It's 9 days, and you need to know that kind of thing. Like, what's the print time? What's the shipping time? What's the turnaround? Give a couple days leeway because the UPS guy loses your stuff, and and make sure again you have all your receipts and your tracking numbers. It's a lot of work. And so it is better to be able to create an inventory and have your own printer. And yeah, those printers are really expensive, but it will save you so much money in the end.
Do you schedule out your work time? Like, do you schedule time for working on the inventory since you're
Yes.
creating it new every year?
Yeah, I have paperwork time that I do, and that's actually my downtime. Where I'm like,
Paperwork.
I'm not painting today, I'm just doing paperwork and inventory, and this is kind of fun because it's organizing. And that makes me weird. But
I have to set timers for that sort of thing because I'm obsessed with organizing stuff.
yes, and
I'm like, you only
yeah.
get 20 minutes, go.
Yeah, you can't get to it for
Yes.
it, but it's so in some years you're gonna have to print a bunch of new stuff, and some years you'll have extra things. Like I have a closet where I have a bunch of extra art prints that I can take to a print shop, or be like, you know what, I don't want to do as many pieces. Like this year, I wasn't sure about my gallery, so I could have entered in the print shop and brought those and made up the revenue that way. So you want to plan for A, B, C, and D, but it is good to eventually have a space where you can store frames throughout the year and you're not buying them all last minute, and you can store extra inventory of your prints or extra canvases and keep an inventory of all of that stuff and back up your computer. Several times. I have 4 hard drives that are all like my computer over and over and over, because inevitably something will happen. Like recently my cat peed on one of them.
Oh.
So I had 3 others. But that was
Bad kitty.
She was really mad at me.
Does anyone have a question specifically for Ariel? She's about to roll out.
When did you know when your business started as everybody's business, I guess, started as a hobby? When did you know that transition, and when to take those steps to transition it from just a hobby to a business?
Honestly, it was always that way for me. Like, I was always interested in making it a job. Even as a child, I just didn't know how that was going to happen. And I think you, in a way, kind of fall. For me, I just kind of fell into it. You do have to understand that as an artist, it isn't just like, oh, I create art and then I put it out, people love it and they buy it. Like, no, you need to be a business person too. You are, especially, you're working for yourself. You are the accountant. You are the artist, you are inventory, you're marketing, you wear a lot of hats. And you also have to remember that you wear a lot of hats and it's very stressful. So if you can delegate, you delegate, you know?
But a lot of times you can't delegate.
But a lot of times you can't.
Especially when you're first starting.
Have patience with yourself. It's a big thing. Have patience with yourself, with people you can lean on. And like I was saying, I like the inventory time because sometimes I'm like, I can't pay anymore. I'm at a crossroads or this or that. So I'm gonna go work on my business plan. And you know, something to always feel like you're moving forward and like you're bettering yourself.
Another question would be, when you're doing conventions or you're doing shows, do you have any strategy of the good ones to pick and the bad ones to stay away from?
Yeah, when you get a few under your belt, you'll know which things are popular, and then you can do sales projections, which is really, really important for inventory management. I have, X number of pieces that if I don't bring over this many, they always sell out. So I know that I need to bring, X amount of each one.
Yeah, and know your popular stuff too, and know yourself. Because people will tell you, oh yeah, our store is really great, or our gallery is really great. You're gonna make a lot of money and this and that. And
yeah,
you might not. You might not. Like the print shop here, I have not sold very well there, so I don't do it right now because it's a waste of money right now for me. So I get a lot of questions, why not? And my answer usually is, I have a Society 6, or I have a Patreon, or I have this or that, and you can go here. Here's my business card, and it ships right to your house,
Or Tavarantes.
Or Tavarantes, and I'm lucky to have Tavarantes. So, I'm always going to have that. So I'm looking at Charles Urbach's model a lot more now, and like how to transition more in that direction. And you look at people that are successful and people that are doing well, and see, cherry pick what works for you and what are they doing, and
Charles, she just said you're successful.
I know. Well, some days it feels that way, not every day. But one of the things with the inventory is really important. And when you're starting out, you're not going to have a big inventory. You're not going to be able to bring. And
Thanks, Ariel.
So it's okay to start off wherever you're at. You don't have to jump to 11 on your first show. But by the same token, you do want to make sure you are going to shows with enough inventory to justify going to the show. After, and I'll use an example. There's a couple artists now who are doing vlogs. Like I saw your C2E2 one, which is why I was impressed. That's what, because I saw another artist's vlog after JordanCon, and she talked about how, I brought one suitcase of prints, and she got on the plane and everything, and there's no way one suitcase of prints can justify the costs of going to JordanCon.
JordanCon is so expensive.
It doesn't. It's nothing to do with your talent. It has nothing to do with it. It's just, why are you there? And I don't mean that your art isn't good enough. Why? It's why are you spending thousands of dollars to attend this convention and have a table there, and you don't have a plan in place to bring enough product to even remotely potentially? If she sold every single print she bought, she probably wouldn't pay for her trip. And I use that as an example because getting out there, and this is maybe specific to artists as opposed to somebody that's going to be retailing or something like that, but there's no point in going to a show just to see people and be seen. There's no point to pay for $1,000 for a booth and then travel costs and hotel costs. If your thing's costing you $4,000 and you show up with 35 prints that you're going to sell for $20 each, why are you there? So when you're figuring out inventory, pick shows that are appropriate for what you can do. You can start out small and you build up to it. Or if you're going to do a bigger show, how do I get enough product there to actually present well? How do I have a booth space that's competitive with that? Because it's good, just showing up is good, but part of your planning needs to be, how do I put on a display and bring enough product to be commensurate with the show I'm at? As opposed to just, I'm going to be there and magically it's going to work out. It's no, that's not really what happens.
That's not how magic works.
No.
And the thing about inventory is like I've had pieces sell out so fast, even when I thought I brought enough that I had to go and buy a printer and print at the hotel. And that's not fun. That's really not fun. So you're gonna have some things happen like that, and you know, try not to stress out about it, but especially don't start out huge. There was an artist behind me at C2B2 this year, and it was her first convention selling her art. It is $470 for an artist table if you pay through PayPal or credit card. That is a lot of money to drop on one table, and especially if it's your first one. Thankfully, I think she was local, so she didn't have hotel cost to add on top of that. But she didn't have a super great weekend. And that can be soul crushing when you have this huge expense and yet you don't make it. So start out with cons that are smaller, more local to you, that have fandoms that are centric to what you do. And my advice, and you can take it or leave it, I would not do most very first year cons, because there's a lot of chance that things will fall apart. So do a con that's been going for at least a couple of years. But yeah, there are a lot of smaller shows where it's $100 or less for a table, and that's where you want to start.
Any other questions from the audience?
I got a couple, just because I'm starting out just myself.
Bring them.
Go to law school. Be a doctor, it's easier.
Alice always says, if you can do anything but right, do it.
I appreciate your question, because I'm in that transition point from I have a full-time job that is now a part-time job, and I'm transitioning from hobby to artist. My first question is, how is working at a convention different from working at a generic arts or craft show? For those of you who may have done both.
Yeah, I have done both. It's generic arts and crafts draws a very particular market, like a very particular audience. And many times now, some of those shows are juried, and if they're juried, it's a lot better, so you have a better chance. But if you're doing something that's fantasy or sci-fi or fandom based, if it doesn't have a wide general appeal, you're probably not going to have super great sales. Now, if you can do, luckily my stuff is funny, and so my stuff has a really wide appeal. I've sold at art shows or art festivals where it was like arts and jazz, and this farmer who was in blue overalls and a dirty t-shirt with a trucker hat on said, "Man, says don't be a beep. How much is that?" And I'm like, "That's great," you know. And if you have a wider appeal, you can do a lot more things. If you're specifically more sci-fi or fantasy, you really need to do conventions, because a lot of people at the other shows are just not going to get what you do.
And it's okay to try different venues. I would never say, don't do it, but go into it as a learning experience. Don't go into it, don't put your hopes and emotions like, I'm going to do, the Midwest Craft Festival, and then you go there and it's like, oh, my stuff didn't sell.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, it's not your fault. It's like you tried something just to see how people responded to it, and it didn't work. And there's a principle in investments, like stocks and stuff, where you never risk what you can't afford to lose. And that's what I say with convention events. It's your business. If it costs you $100 to get in a show, and for whatever reason you feel you have the time, the sacrifice of time and everything, you can learn from that. And it's valuable to learn. You find out, okay, my stuff didn't connect with this audience at all. By the same token, though, sometimes it takes a little, maybe you need to change something with your display. I did a Comic-Con, a Pittsburgh Comic-Con, which is a good-sized Comic-Con. If there hadn't been a Magic tournament there, I would have lost money on that show. I did, a few years later, a Comic-Con in Madison, Wisconsin, and it blew the doors off of a whole bunch of it, because I got connected with other conventions in the region and everything. It was amazing. What was different? Was it because my display was different? Was it because the community? So there's something to be said for learning from each success and failure. But I would say, specific to craft fairs, if you are doing genre work, most people are, and I did an upscale arts and crafts festival in Oshkosh, Wisconsin last summer, And I made enough money to cover my booth and not be a complete waste of time, but had I not had other events in the same travel cycle where I was out there, it would not have been worth my time. And it was just they weren't interested. They don't want to buy dragons and castles and stuff like that. They want lawn ornaments and, tchotchkes and stuff. And it's like, okay. So I would say start where your work is, where it makes sense for what you're doing. And then try to experiment, knowing you're going into it, taking a risk.
Yeah. Also, a lot of the craft shows are outdoors, and understand that setup and investment is very different.
Yes.
So you have things where you have to buy a tent and all of that stuff. I would, like I said, if you feel like your stuff fits Mordecon, you're probably right.
Okay, gotta find the people who will appreciate you and what
Yes.
you have to offer.
Yeah.
What else?
My next question was, how long did it take you, like when you were first starting off, or maybe you're still in this process, to build your reputation as an artist?
Do you mean?
5 minutes. Just
That's hard to answer because it somewhat depends on the specific arena that you're talking about. But maybe I can answer it through an example. The first big vending convention I went to was that Origins Game Fair, and I made the choice to go there, to move from, and here, this is a good convention that's an example. You have the art show, which is like a gallery space, where the artists hang their work, and then the art show staff takes care of the actual nuts and bolts of it. Then you have vendors, and there's more artists here this year than previous years and things, and we sell our own stuff. That first vending, one of the reasons I did it was because I finally had a whole bunch of published gaming art. So I felt that I would be relevant to that audience because when they came up and people said, oh, why are you here? What have you done? I could say, well, there's 30 cards for Legend of the Five Rings, and then those players were there competing in their national tournament and stuff like that. So I made that specific decision based on relevance. I made the move when I felt I had the name as an artist. But even then it becomes sort of a different scale. Then compared to the person who'd done all these Magic cards, I was nobody. So, and then the Magic players would be, have you done anything? Oh, okay, whatever, we don't care. So, my answer is, it takes years and years and years, and you never stop building up your name as an artist. Because, what they say, there's always a bigger fish. You might be really big at your local con, but then you come to another con and nobody cares. They've never heard of you, your work isn't relevant to them, and it might take you another 3 years in that environment to do that.
I would say you don't always know when it happens. Like there's, like you said, you never stop doing it. You never stop building this reputation and building this name for yourself. For me, I've never done any major published stuff. I just started doing conventions because I wanted to do art and sell art, and I was doing jewelry before, so I started with arts and craft shows and stuff like that, and did a little bit of art there. But it's interesting because what I do is so vastly different from what Charles does. I do things that are funny and eye-catching, and I have to set up a display with that in mind, with what I do in mind. So when people know me, they know me by, oh, are you the funny bird lady? So
the sassy bird
the
lady.
sassy bird lady, yeah. Are you the sassy bird lady? So they know me by by basically artsy memes. And yeah, that's pretty much what I do. And when I post them on the internet and everything like that, and they get shared a little bit, that's kind of how people started to recognize me, rather than having a published work out there. So you can go whatever direction works for you. But I will say that I probably have as much reputation for the way that I engage people as I do for what I do. And it's important to me to maintain that friendliness, that I always make people laugh, that I always make people feel good. When they come away from my table, they should feel better for having been there.
I agree with that sentiment 100%. I could not agree more. That's well said.
Do y'all have any sort of tips for displays? Advice about that? I know that's a really broad, we could do a whole panel on that.
That's a subject unto itself.
We've got about 5 more minutes and everyone seemed to be pretty interested
I'll say something quick because it was relevant here. Diversity is not a bad thing. There are artists right now who think it's really important that you brand yourself and that you do the same thing, basically variations on a theme. I don't agree with that. I don't think that's wrong or bad necessarily, but that's a certain path that you're choosing. Don't be afraid. I mean, you come up to my wall and I've got all different genres of subject matters, and it has very much worked for me. Anybody who says, well, you can't do that, you shouldn't do that, it should be unified, people should be able, it's like, well, that's a choice you make, and that is a choice. But I think diversity ultimately is very, very useful.
Yeah, I agree.
It keeps you from getting bored too. You don't want to make your art a box.
Right. I have, I would say the majority of my brand is the funny animals, but it's not all I do. What I do for myself is, is like some fantasy stuff or some just animal illustrations and everything. And you have to do what you like. If you don't like what you do, people will see it in your art. So if you feel the need to draw or paint or do something, pursue that and don't push it aside. In terms of display though, I will say, if you see somebody who has a really great display, take notes. Like if you pass a table that you can't look away from, that's a good display. So take notes. Feel free to ask people questions, like ask artists, like this, I really love these, this particular stand or these racks, where did you get them? Some people might not be friendly enough to share. I don't see why they wouldn't, because like anything that I got, I'm happy to send people links to and everything. But yeah, just take notes, study, and when you build your display, map it out on paper. Like he was saying, have backup plans. Plan for what specific table sizes you expect to see for 8x2 tables, for 6x2s, for 6x3s. Plan for all of that and just graph it out on paper. Be like, okay, I need this much vertical space. How do I get that? So
And be prepared to adapt. Don't feel like, oh my God, I can't do this, what am I going to do? Or sometimes there'll be some weird thing, like your neighbor puts up a wall that completely blocks out your display.
Yeah.
And that's extremely frustrating. And sometimes you literally can't do anything about it, but be prepared to think outside the box. Like say, okay, how can I reconfigure what I brought with me to make maximum use of it? You've got to be able to think on your feet. And in the same token, don't be afraid to adjust your displays for different types of shows. If you're going to, like I'm doing Anime Central this year for the first time because I have literally hundreds of pieces of art related to samurai and Asian culture. I'm going to have some of my more traditional Western fantasy work up, but I figure it's a safe bet to start with the samurai. And that's the kind of decision I make every single con, or maybe even during the con I realize, nobody cares about this. So I'm going to take this down and put up a piece, or I try not to do it, but sometimes I'll even tweak positioning throughout the con because I know if people can see this one better, I know it'll sell better. And that's more of a finesse type thing. It's kind of an experience thing. But it's good to start paying attention to that early on. Even if you only have 5 pieces of art, think about that stuff.
Yeah, totally agree.
5 pieces of art displayed well is better than,
Then
100 of art
pieces
not displayed well.
in a gigantic wall and all looks like chaos.
Because people they don't know where to look if it's too crowded, kind of. So. All right, we've got a couple more minutes. Any other questions?
A quick question about kind of like pricing and thinking about inventory, just in regards to things that can be recreated versus things that can't be. You guys have talked a lot about prints. I'm not really familiar with that, but kind of like, can you sell original work? Is that something that you've been able to do well at cons, or is there a different market for that? And do you kind of plan for that? And just, I don't know, just kind of in general, how do you address original versus replicated work?
A decent amount of originals, but almost all my work is published. So there's a little bit of, it's hard, I don't like saying the words because it doesn't feel that way, but I'm a little bit famous. And so the art my originals have value, and not as much as other artists who are much, much more famous. But it's circumstantial. Like a Magic player would pay way more for a Magic card. That same piece of art, you could take it to a con where nobody's playing Magic and they don't care. So I do sell originals, but I never bank on sales of originals. That is completely random. It's one of those things that you're always working toward that, but you're not building a business plan around it because you don't control it at all. You know, I have collectors who will easily drop $4,500, and when that happens, it's like, oh, we're good. This show's good. I can just go home. I don't go home. The vast majority of what I sell are $10 prints. And I made a conscious effort to come up with a system that allows me to sell $10 prints, $30 prints, and $60 prints. And there are artists who will say, well, $10 prints, you're devaluing your work and everything. And there's all these philosophical things. And again, you could discuss any one of these topics for 6 hours.
For real.
But,
Sorry, I gave you 2 minutes.
but the key is find what works for you. One of the catering advices that my father gave me were, do you want to sell, 100 hot dogs for $1 or one thing of filet mignon for $100? And it's a business decision. And my answer was, I want to sell 100 for $1 because that gets my name out vastly faster and in a larger spread than that one famous piece. Other artists will tell you flat out, it's like, I want to sell high ticket items. I don't want to waste my time selling $10 prints. I want to sell an $80,000 original. And if he does that in a year, he's made really good money if he's done it.
You set your own goals and then you meet them, but no one else is setting them for you.
I will say, sorry.
No, that's,
Just really quick. If you are only selling originals, you're vastly limiting your inventory ability.
Yeah.
So you're limiting how many conventions or however many events you can do.
And you need to go to events where people have deep pockets and expect to pay
I was
that.
sort of wondering too about the culture and how you kind of decide and know, is this somewhere I can get $1,000 out of a piece, or do I need to price according, or even create according to what the culture
Yes.
of where you're trying to market to?
There's an event called IllexCon in Reading, Pennsylvania, which is where a lot of fantasy, they call it imaginative realism now, because it's basically surreal. It's basically a fine arts event. Well, again, that's something I could talk for an hour about. But IllexCon has a main show which has actual famous, like Boris Vallejo and people like that. If you want to go to the who's who of like fantasy art or imaginative realism, IllexCon is the place to go. Then they have the showcase, which is where grunts like me go. And the consensus there is people want to buy $100 to $200 originals for their collections, kind of entry-level originals. I sold one for considerably more. Pencil Boy sold one for considerably more last year, to the chagrin of a number of people around me. And it's the kind of thing where those artists make art according to those rules. I don't, because I'm not interested in that. If I happen to have some lower priced originals, I happily bring them. But I'm not going to cater to it because my experience there has taught me that you can't control it. I go to that con, I've been there twice, and I went both years expecting to lose money because it's a gamble, it's capricious, and this year somebody happened to like robots, and I was like the only person there with a robot piece, which ironically was a piece about the statement of how homogenized, there was a statement piece about the art of the sci-fi fantasy industry, about how there are artists who are elevated and stuff, and I couldn't tell them, I can't say that out loud at the event when all these people are pooping out exactly the same thing, and I'm like, yeah, this is pretty much about IllexCon, but I can't say that. What you just said is exactly true. The answer is yes to literally every part of your question. But because there is no single answer to it.
all right, well, we're at time. Maybe we'll do another thing like this next year.
Yeah.
But thank you guys for coming.
We have booths over in the dealer room.